Professor Santos talks about this as ecology of knowledge, that there are different ways of understanding the world, that there can never be a general theory that will encompass all the experiences of everyone in the world. And yes, this is the first time I'm presenting my ideas to the public. The first time was initially it was meant to my supervisor, but last month I faced my first year PhD panel of 5 professors. They're very critical of my group because I'm very critical of the legacy of the West in the global South, in our country, in other countries of Africa. And they tried to ask why I would not use so many other theoretical frameworks, such as that of John Rawls, his theory of justice, his law of peoples. And I explained that when John Rawls was theorizing about his law of peoples, with all the exalted and beautiful concepts of theorizing from the veil of ignorance, where you don't know who is on the other side. So you conceptualize and theorize as though you were the one there, you don't know who's there. I said I doubt that he had Africa's diversity particularly in mind. Moreover, the Western construction of Africa is so homogeneous as to keep any scholar who doesn't have sufficient intimate interest, and connection with the nature of Africa, blind from the reality of the diversity of Africa and the legacy of colonialism. And very soon we shall discuss colonialism and its impact in our strategies to peace building and the kind of state we have, so we understand the point more clearly. So, difference captures the people's way of life, the way they perceive the world, their language, their territorial rights or perception, their sense of autonomy, and finally, cultural and traditional heritage. Now, these are 4 things. There is no amount of constitutionalism that will make people ignore what they think they are. Yes, when you say there is no part of the constitution that says indigenous center, or you see, we forget that Nigeria is a colonial construct, it's an imperialistic construct. Where people were invaded, their consent was not sought, and they were lampooned together in one political entity, and they were expected to somehow coexist. Well, at that higher pedestal of governance was a white man who at that time believed that he was racially superior. And in fact, as you shall see from Lord Lugard's memoirs, he went about categorizing different peoples of Nigeria according to the particular way of thinking, scientific racism of his day. For example, he categorized the Hausa man as being of a low British stamp. He used terms like the backwater of the Negroes, the different Negroes. He believed that some particular ethnic groups are born to rule. He actually obtained approval of the colonial office to use a particular ethnic group as rulers or governors because he believed that they were savage, barbaric, and absolutely no intelligence. Now, these 4 criteria that I use, by which the people identifies itself and sees its world, land and territorial rights, language, sense of autonomy, and cultural and traditional heritage are things that people in Africa hold very strongly. We, the elites that have been educated in the Western model, have been trained to fill in the gap left by the European elites. But you see, when we say that over 70% of Nigerians live in poverty, who are we talking about? Are we not talking about those amongst our society who have not been able to acquire Western education? Where is their sense of dignity in terms of their own identity? Well, I seem to think that the Europeans have more respect for Africa before colonialism. When I was reading Heinrich Barth's account of his travels from Tripoli into Africa, and his quest to go and see the great and enormous and very marvelous kingdom of Carnival, he had this immense sense of respect. But the moment colonialism took place, that sense of respect seemed to vanish. So, the Hausa man, for example, in Kano, there was this Moroccan leather that was still being called Moroccan leather, produced in Kano. I don't know why he was doing Moroccan leather. But it was so popular that Kano, in a way, was providing fabrics to a very large expanse of the sub-Saharan region into the Arab world. Very far and very wide. And at that time, I also realized that the Americans were having a good food. They had a slave market somewhere in the Niger state of today. where they came to buy slaves, the Americans. At that time, the British were at the forefront of the fight for the abolition of slavery. Americans were coming to buy slaves and also bringing their police, trying to destroy these industries that we have, including a certain glass industry that was ignorant, as it was stated. Henry Bart's accounts tended to, be somehow, there's a way to identify places that you really need to think hard to be able to connect with that. So, recognition of difference as ways of life for every single ethnic group that perceives itself as different. There's very little you can do to change that. Even for the educated, they rise through the ranks of Western education. But at a fundamental level, you still seem to notice that this quality of ethnic and religious difference lingers very strongly up to the ladder, to the very top. And yet, honestly, I must commend the bravery and boldness of our politicians who come out and pretend that these things don't matter. Because, in fact, some of them are able to accommodate difference at the elite level so conveniently that the realities of diversity have been clouded to a very significant extent. So, cognitive justice demands for recognition of difference. The second principle is intercultural translation. Now, it says that for interaction between two groups that perceive themselves as different to be positive and fruitful, it must be positive. It must be well handled. The frontiers of cultural contact should be managed well. However, I have a problem with the system of state that we have because it pretends that diversity it should be relegated to the background. The colonialists were the first people to start this because according to Lugard, Northern Nigeria, the Northern Nigeria of his dream was a homogeneous society. I think Lugard would be very disappointed if he came here today to find out that diversity he tried so hard to obliterate still lingers and is the cause of so much unrest. So, intercultural translation is not only an exercise in intellectual hospitality, but also a suggestion that it is not good fences that make good neighbors. Don't get it wrong, we're not talking about good fences, but good conversation and concepts, which are disciplined trespasses. When you trespass into the cognitive territory of another identity, and you do be conscious of the fact that I recognize this identity as being equal to me and respectful, and the other identity knows that you recognize their own uniqueness and respect them, the likelihood of conflict will be highly minimized. But you see, the Western construct of the state that we have leaves us with very few options. I dare to say that most of us here are mental slaves, who have been colonized mentally. We cannot learn anything outside of the English books that we see, whether it's of law or any other discipline. And English language has been demonstrated by research to lack the terms to capture other views of the world. That is why in cognitive justice, you find other words that have been invented by scholars who are trying to create a new way of viewing the world. Professor Santos accuses Western thinking of being an abyssal thinking. It only sees things in two ways. And one must be right, the other must be wrong. The one that is wrong must be beaten into line to fit into what has been legislated. And this is a legacy from the Westphalian state that we have heard, the peace of Westphalia, where there is a sovereign who makes law and everybody must follow. There is the right and the wrong, valid, invalid, civilized and uncivilized. So there's this binary, mental binary created in us, having been schooled in English, that even to connect with some of our native indigenous ideas of how to conceive the world is difficult. In the course of my research, other ways of conceiving the world that came up are, one, for example, Samakos, which is a unique Native American way of viewing the world, which has certain concepts that are absent in Western epistemology. In Western epistemology, for example, a tree is nothing other than an object that should be used for commercial purposes. But in American epistemology, a tree could serve as different purposes. It could be something sacred. The river is treated as a bane. They give rights to nature. But in the West, when you talk of rights to nature, that is totally absurd. Now, coming back home to Nigeria, some research has been done about the Bagi people and their way of viewing the world. It is spelled K-N-U-K-N-U. I don't know if I can pronounce it well when I say Nunu or something like that. They have their own way of perceiving time, the relation between the human being and the earth, and nature, and between one other people, intercultural. The same with Indians. In East Africa, they have something they call Ubuntu, which is good living, which will not exactly fit with the Western conception of the world, especially with neoliberal capitalism and its Bretton Woods institutions of accumulation profit. Now, these views of the world should be accommodated as far as cognitive justice is concerned. Now, the principle of cognitive justice is alternative approaches to problem solving. There mustn't be just two ways. There mustn't be just a universe. Instead of a universe, in cognitive justice, we talk about pluralities, where there are multiple ways of viewing the world. Instead of hierarchies, which we think are somehow imbued with that character of injustice, imperialism, and the quest of homogeneity, we talk of anarchy, governance through networks. Well, it would appear that the greater consciousness of Nigeria is making hierarchical structures to begin to fade. Structures that were imposed for the sake of controlling us, which was the fundamental basis for building the Nigerian society. Now, based on these three principles of cognitive justice, I have tried to evolve three tests of a cognitively just constitutional framework, which I call the tripartite test of a cognitively just constitutional and legal peace-building framework. And these questions are as follows. 1. Does the Constitution and the legal framework for peace building allow for recognition of difference as ways of life? 2nd, does the Constitution and the legal framework for peace building allow for intercultural translation by virtue of its recognition of these 4 lines of difference in perception of otherness and the world, and tries to manage them? Does it do that? And thirdly, does the Constitution allow for plurality of solutions and paths to problem solving? Or must we climb up the hill of the path that has been set, a path that has been pursued by different coalitions and inquiries without meeting any result? Must we watch everyone and changing the thing in accordance with what the Constitution has said? We ignore the cognitive diversity of our world and try to fashion up, get everybody into line to suit the standards that have been created by some other people and given to us who are trying to develop upon through constitutional amendments over the ages. One of my postulations is that we never really had a constitution. We never did. We, the people of Nigeria, having suddenly decided to give ourselves this constitution, decided to be one indivisible country. Okay, 2 people. I'm not quoting exactly this constitution. Well, who are we? Maybe those of us who went to school and learned the Western ways and stepped into the shoes of the colonial masters. Well, maybe not all of us in that level. Maybe those of us who are opportunity to be in the corridors of power. But even at that level, some have dreams. So, well, who are we? And when this constitution comes, how legitimate is it? When we examine the concept of legitimacy deeply, we realize that what we are operating is an hegemonic construct. And you're trying to build peace and harmony and human respect on hegemonic terms. While in the West thought that you would wash we blacks from our nature and polish us and make us into the new Western civilized people. But it appears that